Tonight you will glance up at the sky and see almost nothing. A few dim points of light, if you're lucky, maybe none at all. The glow of your city swallows the stars before they ever reach your eyes. You'll check your phone instead. But the real answer to what happened to the sky is far stranger than light pollution. Because for most of human history, the night sky wasn't empty. It was the most detailed, most memorized, most argued over document your ancestors owned. And they didn't write it down, they carved it into bone. They painted it onto cave walls. They built it into stone. Thousands of years before anyone thought to build a wheel. Somewhere, deep in the last ice age, a human being looked up and decided the chaos overhead wasn't chaos at all. It was a pattern. And patterns could be tracked. Start with the obvious question. Why would a hunter-gatherer, cold, hungry, exhausted from walking, spend precious energy staring upward instead of sleeping? The answer isn't wonder, not at first. It's survival. Animals migrate on schedules, plants flower on schedules, floods, rains, and frosts arrive on schedules, and every one of those schedules is quietly written across the sky, if you know how to read it. The rising of a particular star cluster before dawn could mean the reindeer are about to move. It could mean the rains are 3 weeks out. It could mean the fish are running. Your ancestors weren't romantics gazing at the heavens. They were reading a calendar that never lied to them. One they didn't need paper for, because it was already hanging over their heads every single night. Here is where it gets strange. The archaeologist Alexander Marshak spent years studying a small, unremarkable-looking bone fragment from Ishango, dated to roughly 20,000 years ago. At first glance, it's just a stick with notches cut into it. Scratches, nothing more. But Marshak noticed the notches weren't random. They came in clusters, groups that rose and fell in a rhythm that matched something very specific, the phases of the moon, 29 days. A new moon, a crescent, a half, a full, and back again, someone was counting. Not once, not by accident. Over and over, across weeks, across months, someone kept a running tally of the sky's changes on a piece of bone they carried with them. That is not idle curiosity. That is the earliest known calendar our species has ever produced. Before farming, before permanent settlements, before writing in any form we'd recognize as writing. Think about what that means for a moment. Long before your ancestors planted a single seed on purpose, they were already tracking time using the moon as a clock face. The instinct to organize the future came before the tools to shape it, and it wasn't only the moon. Deep inside the caves of Lascaux in what is now southern France, painted roughly 17,000 years ago, there's a chamber full of animals. Bulls, horses, deer rendered in ochre and charcoal with astonishing confidence for hands working by flickering firelight. For decades, people saw these paintings as exactly what they appear to be. Hunting scenes, records of prey, maybe ritual art meant to bring luck to the hunt. But the researcher Michael Rappengluck looked closer. Above one of the bulls, there's a small cluster of dots, 6 of them grouped tightly together. Rappengluck proposed something that unsettled a lot of people in his field. That cluster isn't decoration. It's the Pleiades, the same star cluster you could still find tonight, if your sky were dark enough, sitting just above the shoulder of the constellation Taurus, the bull. If Rappengluck is right, the artist wasn't only painting an animal. They were painting the sky that animal lived under. Star and beast fused into a single image, because to your ancestors they weren't separate categories at all. The bull on the wall and the bull in the stars were the same idea, viewed from 2 directions. Is that certain? No. Cave art is notoriously difficult to interpret, and scholars still argue over exactly what those dots mean, but the pattern keeps showing up. Site after site, culture after culture, humans who left behind almost nothing else deliberately preserved a record of the sky. Now push forward several thousand years, to a hill in what is now southeastern Turkey. Göbekli Tepe wasn't supposed to exist. Massive carved stone pillars arranged in circles, built roughly 11,500 years ago by people with no metal tools, no wheel, and no agriculture yet. This was hunter-gatherer engineering on a monumental scale, built thousands of years before Stonehenge, thousands of years before the pyramids. One pillar in particular has become known as the vulture stone. It's covered in carved animals, birds, and abstract symbols arranged in rows, almost like a message. The engineer Martin Sweatman analyzed the carvings and proposed something remarkable. That the animals aren't just animals, they're constellations, a vulture representing a group of stars near the summer solstice, a scorpion marking another. Sweatman even argued the panel might record the approximate date of a real astronomical event. A comet strike thousands of years earlier, passed down through generation after generation until someone finally carved it in stone so it wouldn't be forgotten. Again, this interpretation is debated. Archaeology moves carefully, and it should, but whether or not Sweatman's specific reading holds up, the broader pattern is impossible to ignore. Humans without writing were encoding the sky into permanent materials: bone, stone, cave wall, whatever would last. Why go to that much trouble? Because once you can predict the sky, you can predict everything downstream of it. You know when to move camp before the first cluster of stars rises in the east. You know when the rains are ending, and it's safe to cross the river. You know months in advance when the herds will return. In a world with no written language, no internet, no weather service, the sky was the only forecast anyone had, and it never changed its mind. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. Astronomy wasn't a luxury that showed up after civilization got comfortable. It's the opposite. The evidence suggests sky watching came first, before agriculture, before permanent architecture. Before anything you'd call a settled society, your ancestors were mapping the infinite dark sky while they were still living out of caves and following herds on foot. That reorders the whole story you were probably taught. You likely learned that farming came first and everything else. Religion, astronomy, calendars followed once humans finally stopped moving, but it may have run the other way. The need to predict the sky may be one of the very things that made farming possible in the first place. You cannot plant a seed at the right moment if you have no way of knowing when that moment is. The sky was the tool that made agriculture thinkable, which means the first scientists in human history weren't wearing lab coats. They were sitting in the cold, watching the same 6 dots rise above the horizon, night after night, year after year, until the pattern became undeniable. Now think about what you do with that same instinct today. You open an app that tells you sunrise and sunset down to the minute. You check a calendar synced across 5 devices. You get a notification 3 days before a full moon. Whether you asked for it or not, none of that feels ancient. It feels like the opposite of ancient. But it's the exact same behavior, dressed in glass and silicon instead of bone and ochre. Your brain still wants a pattern to hold on to. It still wants to know what's coming before it arrives. That craving didn't start with smartphones, and it didn't start with agriculture. It started under an open sky with nothing but firelight and patience, when someone decided the chaos overhead wasn't chaos at all. So tonight, when you glance up and see almost nothing, remember what you're actually looking at. Not an empty sky, a closed book. One your ancestors spent tens of thousands of years learning to read, long before they had a word for the stars, and long before they had a reason to believe anyone would ever need to read it again.